Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America. You'll find us online, thisweekinamerica.us. It's the highly anticipated sequel to Greyhound Therapy by J.R. Conway, a fictional treatment of the impact on small communities when people move from one jurisdiction to another by bus. Authorities and mental health institutions sometimes find it more economical or convenient to furnish individuals with a bus ticket rather than, for whatever reason, meet their needs. The sequel is After the Ride, Crime and Compassion. J.R. is a Vietnam-era veteran, multiple tours as a helicopter pilot. Upon retiring, he joined the El Paso County, Colorado Sheriff's Department. For a short time, owned a fixed-base operation selling aircraft and giving flying lessons. After moving from Colorado to Wyoming and along with his wife started a security and private investigation company. 12 years later, moved to New Mexico working as a business consultant and manager of a procurement technical assistance center at community college, assisting businesses working with governments. A talented author, his debut thriller Greyhound Therapy still receiving rave reviews. And now the sequel, After the Ride, Crime and Compassion. J.R. Conway is back with us on This Week in America. J.R., welcome back to the program. It's great to have you with us once again.
It's a pleasure to be back.
And a pleasure to have a second. Thank you. Same here, sir. And a pleasure to have another book of yours to read. I really enjoyed Greyhound Therapy. Couldn't wait to read the sequel, After the Ride, Crime and Compassion. Just as good. You tied up some of the loose ends from the first book, from Greyhound Therapy. Really an interesting ending I can't ask you about, but I'll allude to that. So this is, as I say, is a sequel to Greyhound Therapy. As you were writing Greyhound Therapy, did you have this in mind? Was that part of the intent as you were writing Greyhound Therapy that I'm going to do a sequel?
Yeah, I didn't plan to do a sequel, but the book sort of took a life of its own.
Yes.
And the further I got along to it, the more I thought that it would be just great to have a series instead of just one book.
You know, series, that makes it sound like maybe there's a third one in the works?
There is.
Oh, I'm glad to hear. I was going to save that for the end, but I couldn't wait any longer. So the suspense that we have at the end of After the Ride will follow up in book number 3. You have such great characters. Talk about the Sheriff Craig Spence. I love this guy, and he goes through so much at home and at work. His wife is suffering from cancer, so he's got those issues at home. All sorts of issues at the county jail. Talk about him, because this had to be a fun character to develop, to bring to life and to develop.
Well, you know, the sheriff is actually a live character. That character just takes a life of its own, and he gets to you. He loves people. He loves his job. And he not only is a human being, he has feelings, but if he has to, he'll take you out. And he's representative of the old Western sheriff. No problem is unsurmountable. He'll find a way to solve it, and hopefully nobody gets hurt in the meantime.
And he has a compassionate side, and that's part of the title, After the Ride, Crime and Compassion, in the sequel. A compassionate side, and he deals with so much. I want to just sort of lay the groundwork here in talking about the Greyhound Therapy. The concept, as I mentioned, at some point, people who have really no other place to go are given a ticket, put on a bus, and it becomes somebody else's problem.
Yes. And that happens today, as it did years prior. You know, in some cases, it's humane. These people are generally not the type that needs to go to jail.
Yes.
And in many cases, the areas that they end up in are not capable of taking care of their needs. On the other hand, you look at it from another point of view, it's just disastrous to have to move these people across the country and get no help.
And that's what happens, and it becomes so expensive, and you deal with that in both books, how where they stop is where they end up costing money to take care of them. In the first book, which is still available, Greyhound Therapy, and you'll find both books at bookventure.com in the bookstore. You'll find them at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, link on to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, to get information on the books. In the first book, which was described as thrilling, fast-moving series of events, the sheriff dealt with a murder in his jail, negative politics or navigating the politics of the local government because he's really short-funded, led a chase for a depraved killer, and knowing his wife had cancer and concerned about her health. So he was dealing with a number of issues. Many of the questions left unanswered, if you read Greyhound Therapy, get answered in the new book, the After the Ride, Crime and Compassion. Let's talk about the new book, described as a thrilling minefield of crime and mystery. We start off with another Greyhound ride, and a gentleman who was involved in the Vietnam conflict, Kenneth Boutros, am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's correct.
That's on the bus. Now, talk about him, because he's one of these that this is a troubled individual that's going to end up somewhere, and somebody's going to have to care for him.
Yeah, the thing that happens with Boutros is that it shows the void in our care system for people who gave a lot in support of our country. For an example, he cannot get VA help. And I'm not going to explain why, but in the book it explains that
yes,
there is a void. There's a void there that these people are just hung up. Not only that, he's been moved from one place to another, and in all cases, he was hung out to dry. And as he says, this is the first time that he's ever been received assistance and wasn't put on a bus and sent to nowhere.
And it brings to light the whole problem, a contemporary problem that we're facing with veterans. And, support the military is more than a bumper sticker. There's a whole lot of responsibility that we have as a country, and it's being neglected in large part now. He is going to, find a relative and live on the ranch. Talk about how that develops, because plans don't work out as they were intended to.
Yes, a relative of his owned a ranch, and somehow they made connection. The health center that he was being treated at made a connection with them and made arrangements for him to go live on the ranch instead of going back on the street. Unfortunately, the relative dies, and from that point on, everything goes downhill.
Downhill rapidly.
But as a result of that, another plot evolves.
Yes, and this is fascinating the way this goes. We've got a gentleman by the name of David Cook who ends up sort of in charge of that property. He wants nothing to do with Kenneth. And if I said David was a shady character, that would be probably a kind assessment of him, wouldn't it? This guy this guy's got a lot going on. He's involved in this story with the ranch. He's involved in another story that dealing with a chop shop, basically. So I won't say any more, but he's involved in that aspect of it as well. An interesting case with the coal mine, the Sweetwater coal mine. Just very briefly, you've got an active crime investigation that the sheriff is handling there as well.
Yes, they're always having troubles at mines during a boom. People find ways to make money. Sometimes it's copper wire. Sometimes it's tools or whatever. In this particular case, it happens to be a part of a piece of machinery that disappears. And this thing is huge, but they managed to get it off the premises, and it's quite a neat story of how they finally managed to track this thing down and find the person that was responsible.
And it wasn't easy to do. You've got union involved, and you've got logs, and you can look at this, but you can't look at that. That story unfolds in the book After the Ride, Crime and Compassion. I mentioned the money problems. Had the money problems back in the initial book, Greyhound Therapy. He's got ACLU now. He thinks he's got some funding in place to build a detention center, and he's got the ACLU that's ready to close his jail down, aren't they?
Yes. He's fighting things on both sides, and just when he thinks he's got things set up, things go south again. So it's a continuous problem.
And I almost said more than I should have, but yeah, that's exactly a problem, an ongoing problem that he deals with. In the book, you've got surveillance, you've got stakeouts, all of this that unfolds during the course of the book, After the Ride, Crime and Compassion, available at bookventure.com, that and the original Greyhound Therapy. The book's available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, link onto our website, and get there as well. Also, you've got the local sheriff in Rock Springs that decided he's got a problem with gambling, a prostitution issue as well. So he brings in somebody for undercover work, and the sheriff gets involved in that as well.
You know, the city of Rock Springs in this book has the responsibility of cleaning up an ongoing problem. It reoccurs, actually. During the boom, of course, they had the problem, thought they had it taken care of, and then all of a sudden it props up its head again, and the city police chief thinks he's got a method of taking care of this, and finds out that there's a snake in the woodpile.
Yep, you've got a snitch you're dealing with.
Yes.
And I won't say any more. That's the end of the book, and that's worth getting to the end of the book to have that as well. And talking in the compassion column, I would put Sister Patricia Ann. This shows the compassionate side of the sheriff, doesn't it? The way he responds to her and feels about her.
He really has a heart, and he was concerned about that young lady, and he was determined to find out what happened to her. And in the second book, we find out what happened to the nun.
The second book, After the Ride, Crime and Compassion, J.R. Conway, the author, our guest on the program. As you can tell during this conversation, there are a number of moving parts in the sequel. There's never a shortage of action. How do you go about, I was going to say telling these stories, but figuring out what's going to happen next in the plot? You've got a number of balls in the air that you're juggling all at one time, yet you're able to move the stories, and in some cases they even intertwine.
Actually, the story tells itself. I try to take the reader through all of the twists and turns with a smooth flow. In other words, he doesn't have to guess what just happened.
Yes.
Everything leads up to the event. And it keeps the reader moving. He wants to turn that next page.
Yes. And it has a nice rhythm to it. So often you'll read a book and it's herky-jerky and it's like, God, this was great. And then you got 12 pages of boring stuff, and then you get back maybe to something that's reasonably interesting. You've got a nice rhythm that you maintain all the way through the book. How do you go about doing that to lay out the story so that it does have that continuing flow like that?
Well, I never want the reader to have to go back
Yes.
to find out what happened and what led up to it. It's like life, you know?
Yes.
One thing leads to the other, and that's the way I try to write my book.
And in life, sometimes things happen that you didn't think was actually going to happen the way it did, and that's exactly the way that unfolds in the book. After the Ride, Crime and Compassion. A couple minutes left. It always goes by so quickly when J.R. Conway, the author, is our guest on the program. Who are some of the influences, writers that you have read over the years, writers that you will read now because you really enjoy the stories they tell and how they tell them?
Well, you know, I think I told you once before, I'm not a prolific reader. Most of my reading is sporadic.
Yes.
Someone will say, hey, did you read such and such a book? And I said, no. And they say, well, I happen to have it, and they'll loan it to me, and I'll read it. I like the way some people build their characters. I think that's so important, that the characters have to tell the story. And I just take parts from all of the writers that I read. And I don't actually have any favorites, really. I just read when I can, and when somebody loans me a book to read. That's a little different than most writers, I think.
And it obviously works for you, and it gives you your own voice, your stories, the way you tell those stories. I would think because your mind seems very active. Do you ever shut it down? Are you always thinking of situations you can get the sheriff and his people involved in?
Always. Always.
I thought that was the case. Thought that was the case.
Yeah, I actually, until the book is finished, I'm never not thinking about it. What could happen, what might happen, and why.
Well, all of that is laid out so well in the new book, After the Ride, Crime and Compassion by J.R. Conway, sequel to the book Greyhound Therapy. Both books are now available. You'll find information at bookventure.com in their bookstore. You'll find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can link on directly to get information on both books at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. We'll close with the good news. I'll repeat it, that there will be a sequel, another in the series, and I can't wait to get that, to see what happens with the cliffhanger at the end of After the Ride. Always a pleasure, JR, to have you on the program. Congratulations on another excellent read. Hopefully we'll have you back to be able to talk about the new book, and always a pleasure to have you with us.
I'd love to do it again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. After the Ride, Crime and Compassion, J.R. Conway, our guest on the program. Also check out Greyhound Therapy. The original book, After the Ride, is the sequel. Information at bookventure.com. And, of course, you'll find it all at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back after these messages.